right, some people feeding that the sound is good. All right, so of course, most of you probably know this, but my name is Mike Seeklinder. Today's live stream will cover competition handgun gear setup. So basically, I'm talking to you about gun setup and gear setup. I have I have four of my competition handguns, three of my primary ones that I shoot these days, and then one that I shot a long time ago. So I'm going to talk to you about how I set up my guns, how what I look for on the guns themselves, answer your questions about that. Then I'm going to show you some of the holster gear I have, mag pouches, belt, and I want to try to relate to you, some of the things that I think about when I'm setting up the gear. Of course, when we're doing this, this won't be a true dry fire live stream. This is just to do some Q&A and talk to you a little bit this morning and drink a cup of coffee and show you my gear. But if you are going to have a firearm out, please remember safety first, no live firearms and ammunition, so double check to make sure you don't have any live firearms or ammunition, okay? So, hey, we are up to 23. Good morning. I see a bunch of people jumping on. I know some of you coin members are jumping on, probably AWS coin members. Shout out with your coin number. Go ahead and send that out. And I'm actually supporting one of our new, let me get the other one here, ACSS, American Competitor Shooter Society. This is the ACSS t-shirt. This is actually the cotton variety, but if you notice, we got the new logo. And some of you may or may not know what the logo stands for. The logo has not some trickery in it, but it actually has some unique symbology that you may or may not recognize, but it's very specifically designed. By the way, this is the 3 rule shirt. So I don't know if you can see the 3 rules on my back, my huge muscular back. The 3 rules shirt basically says, and I designed this a long time ago in my previous shirt. So there's the 3 rule shirt. See if you can read that. Yeah. Anyways, you can go to shooting-performance.com, click on the web store on the top side if you are an ACSS member or an AWS member and you want to get a shirt like this. This is actually the other one is the full cotton version. This is the ring spun cotton, which is much softer. It actually hangs a little lower. It conceals a gun, so if you're carrying a gun, this is probably your better bet. Get the ring spun cotton version, and I think you'll like that quite a bit better. For those of you that are new, people that are new this morning, jumping on Wednesday morning, you can check out my bio at shooting-performance.com. Of course, I've been in the military for years, and then law enforcement, and currently full-time professional instructor, as a lot of you know, and sponsored by Team Wilson Combat. I'm going to show you some of my guns here in just a second. For those of you that are not a member of the Training Addicts group, go to Facebook, search Shooting Performance Training Addicts. Join that. That's the free group where I post all of these events. And of course, the page you're watching on now is the page that has the events scheduled in the events section. So if you want to know when the future lives are, we'll talk about those here in a second. Go to events, look at the lives, and go from there. By the way, all right, so let's get right into this. Let's talk about gun and gear setup. And what I have here, I actually have a few different guns. I have a couple. I have actually my new carry-optic gun that's made by Wilson Combat. And by the way, all 3 of these guns are Wilson Combats, and I have one old Smith & Wesson M&P that I used to compete with when I used to shoot for Smith & Wesson. So these 2 guns, I want to talk to you first about them, are basically identical guns in terms of how they're set up. Now, they're not identical in terms of their fit and their finish. As you can see, this has a different bluing or finish than this gun does. This kind of has a unique finish, and there's some slide work done to this gun that there is. This is my current IDPA division carry optics division gun, and this is my current IDPA ESP gun. So this is actually the one that I won. This is the one that I won the IDPA Nationals with last year. So that's the national gun right there. They're both basically Wilson Combat CQBs, but let me talk to you about what I look for in terms of my gun setup. And by the way, the biggest thing that you can do, or one of the biggest things you can do beyond some of the manipulation devices on a competitive handgun, is be able to visually see what you need to see to hit the target, right? So one of the first things I address in my competition handgun setup is the sights. Now, in this case, this particular gun has a Wilson Combat front and rear sight. Okay, obviously I love the sights they have. So in this gun, what I want you to pay attention to is the rear sight is an adjustable rear sight. The front sight is actually a fiber optic front sight, and more specifically, it's kind of a unique fiber optic front sight in that it has a small cutout in the back, which allows me to put a fiber optic in a gun. But when you look through the actual sight itself, I'm not sure if you can see when I get really, really close to that front sight. Let me try to get it on the other side of that lion. So when you see the front sight, it is unique in that it's very, very thin when I look through that rear dot. So because of this cut in this separation in the front sight, that allows me to have the fiber optic or a bigger fiber optic in the sight itself, but this cut allows me to basically see through the rear hole in the sight, so it keeps my front sight perspective, you know, very, very precise in terms of the sight itself, if that makes sense. Can you all see that okay? This is very difficult to hold this in front of the camera, okay? So what I'm talking about is a way so I can have a thinner front sight. So in my competition handguns, I want a slightly thinner front sight, and I want a pretty wide and deep and robust rear sight. So if you take a look at the rear sight now, you can see my rear sight is basically a rear sight, you know, U notch, right? So this U notch allows me to, you know, have the perspective of the sight, and there's, you know, it's very easy for me to tell the difference between the front and rear sight because they're equal light gaps. You know what I'm saying? I want to have equal light gaps in the gun itself. Let me see if I can line it up. There we go. So you can almost see what's going on in terms of the light gaps itself. This is really hard to do. But the point is, the thicker the front sight is, the more it fills the rear sight gap, and the less or the smaller the light bars are on this difference on the sides of the sights, if that makes any sense. And that's exactly right, Rich. The front sight is a very precise front sight. It also is serrated. And this is not one that you'll see on most of the guns that come from Wilson Combat. I'm not sure. I mean, first of all, they can customize or do any kind of sights you want pretty much. But it's not one that they put on most of. Most of them have a slightly thicker front sight, which is okay. Now, the disadvantage of having a super thin front sight and a bigger, deeper, wider rear sight notch is that there are bigger light bars, so you may not see the difference, okay? And what I mean by different light bars, everybody understand when I'm saying light bars, I'm talking about the difference between the front and the rear sight. If the front sight is thicker, it fills up the rear sight, right? So if the front sight is in the rear sight, it's probably going to be a more precise shot. If the front sight is thinner and the rear sight is wider, then that gives me more movement in the sight, meaning I can have the front sight and the rear sight, and there's more movement. So I need to make sure those light bars on either side of the front sight are equal, if that makes any sense. Now, Elke asked about the rear sight U notch. Now, I prefer a U. I don't know who did the original U version of the sight. I mean, I think probably maybe Scott Warren started that, where instead of the rear bottom of the rear sight is square, it was U'd out. What he did was he took the corners of the rear sight and he just rounded them off, and it makes for a softer rear sight. So I'm a fan of a U'd, like a true U, or even a rounded corner rear sight versus a square notch. Now I'll take a square notch if it's deep enough for me to see the entire front sight as well. I want to be able to see the entire front sight, okay? Now, on my competition handguns, if I can, like this particular Beretta does not have an adjustable rear sight. This has an adjustable rear sight. So if I have a choice, I am always going to have an adjustable rear sight on my competition handguns, because precise zeroing is one of my goals. I want to be able to adjust the sights, you know, ad nauseum. I want to be able to adjust them continually, so I have the most precise zero I possibly can, if that makes any sense, okay? The U makes a big difference in terms of my sight focus, right? So that U on the sight really, really helps me, A, see the entire front sight, and then B, read what the front sight is telling me in terms of its relationship between the front and the rear sight itself, okay? The second thing that I want to talk about is, you know, manipulation and friction surfaces. So in this particular case, actually with both of these guns, you see I have kind of a skateboard tape type grip. So these grips are actually made by Techwell. The magwell is made by Techwell. Not necessarily that it's like the only magwell that's good. I mean, our magwells and a lot of our standard 1911s and Wilson Combat are awesome. I put a Techwell on because it's one of the easiest ways for me to get skateboard on my grip, or skateboard surface on my grip, which to me is the most friction surface that I could possibly find. So back to the task at hand. So either I have a skateboard type grip or the most aggressive grip panels I possibly can. Or in the case, for example, of this old M&P that I used to compete with Smith & Wesson, there's pretty robust stippling on the grip itself. Now, if I were shooting, this gun again, if I were still competing with this gun, I would actually, this is kind of neat how this design is on the side of the grip, I would absolutely stipple the entire grip here. So if you're stippling one of your polymer guns, XDM, Smith & Wesson, you shoot a Glock or whatever else, I would stipple the entire side panels of the grip. Now, I don't normally want aggressive, stippling or skateboard on the back of the gun here because, when I draw the handgun, my hand slides up the gun itself. So, for example, with this particular gun, like my 1911, I have, there's some square checker in here on the standard, excuse me, mainspring housing, but it's not super aggressive, and I would never put skateboard tape there because when I draw the handgun, I want my hand to be able to make contact. In essence, I'm taking the weapon in my hand, I'm making contact, and I'm driving it up the back strap of the gun. So I want this area of the gun to not have a ton of friction. I want all the friction on the grip panels on the side, and the front is okay too. Like this is pretty aggressive on the front. So on the side, on the rear side, this is all great areas to have friction on the gun itself, okay? But I don't want friction on the back of the gun because then it'll stop my hand from sliding, okay? I've got a little bit of a relief cut on the side of the grip here. A lot of times when you have some of the factory grips that Wilson offers have a natural relief cut where my thumb goes. But basically, I've done everything I can do to make the gun fit in my hand to be able to hit the release and stuff like that. Now, these guns, this 1911 and my other 1911, and good morning, Gary from Marylandistan. I see Gary from Marylandistan. That's kind of funny, right? My 1911s currently have flat triggers on them. Now, the reason I like a flat trigger on a gun, if I could pick it, specifically my 1911s, is now with a flat trigger, no matter where my finger hits this trigger, I'm going to be applying pressure, equally on the trigger straight to the rear, if that makes any sense. But the flat trigger allows me to pull the trigger and have the same pressure on the trigger no matter where I touch the trigger with my finger, if that makes any sense. Versus in some triggers you don't really have a choice. Like if you're shooting a production type gun or an SSP type gun, like this is my Beretta 92G, it has a curved trigger, right? So when the gun is in single action mode, it is a curved trigger. But notice on this, even on this curved trigger, when I put pressure to the rear of the gun, I'm actually putting pressure directly to the rear, and there's not a lot of curve in this position. So when the gun is in single action mode, it almost is like a flat trigger that I would pull straight to the rear. Right. Now, all of the triggers on my guns, are as light as I could possibly get the triggers. This one actually will probably be lighter in the future because with my 1911s, a lot of times I will reduce or put a reduced hammer spring in. And what I want to do, and I want a hammer spring that will give me positive ignition on the actual primer. But what you're going to realize, and I don't want to get too far into 1911 trigger stuff or trigger jobs, the less weight there is on the hammer pushing on the sear, the lighter the trigger can be without having any fear of trigger, bounce, or maybe even not resetting because maybe not moving your finger quite as far. So I like a reduced spring on the actual hammer itself. But in terms of trigger, most of my triggers, or almost all my triggers, they're in the 2.5 pound range probably. I'm not sure exactly what this one is. Right now, currently they're all done by Wilson. I can do my own 1911 triggers. I typically don't because they do such a great job on them. But I want to have a very definitive prep point where I can feel where the trigger is and press. It's pretty light, but it's a definitive prep point. It's the same thing, for example, on my single action Beretta triggers. There's a very definitive prep point and press. Okay. Now, one more tip for you, and I'll show you both of these production type guns, is when you look inside the mag wells, do you notice how the mag wells are kind of viewed out and rounded out? What I see a lot of times, I see a lot on M&Ps and XDMs, for those of you, and Glocks that are shooting production type guns, that leave that square surface inside the inner portion of the mag well. And I see competition shooters at matches all the time that leave that. Well, that square surface, that's inside the mag well is in essence basically a catch. So when you try to insert the magazine, it catches on that square surface. So one of the things you're going to want to do within the rules is you're going to want to relieve and open up. My point there is with your mag well opening, I want to open this up and relieve this all the way to the outer edge within the legal parameters, whatever division you're shooting. And that's the same thing, for example, with my 1911, this is open up all the way to the outer edge. And of course it has a mag well, but I'm going to open up this as deep as possible. I'm going to take material off the inside portion of the grip. Now don't go to Wilson Combat and say, Mike is grinding on his guns. We don't need to tell them that. We don't need to say that. But I grind on my guns a little bit, right? My gunsmith over there loves me, and he knows that too. Shout out to him. But like even with this one, I just got this one. There's some square surface edges right there. I will round that off in the near future. That's really about it on competition handgun. Like I said, I like a flat trigger. I'm trying to think of what else I might tell you about. If I had my old limited guns back when I used to shoot limited, you would see the plastic frame relieved under the trigger guard, and mainly on this side because my knuckle is bigger and thicker on that side of the gun. So what I used to do is I used to actually relieve and modify my grip so I could take the handgun, I could push it out in front of me, and it was pointing exactly where it needs to point, and I would modify the grip until it does that. And by the way, this is my Carry Optics gun. This is I've been shooting this recently. I need to make a decision if I'm going to shoot Carry Optics in the IDPA Worlds this year, or if I'm going to shoot iron sighted. That has the Delta Point Pro on it in terms of an optic. But in other words, basically these two guns are identical. Actually, you probably notice there is one difference other than the optic and the finish, and that is this particular mag well is still on the gun in the front area. This one we machined off the front so I could rip the magazine out easier. I don't know if I need the front of the mag well or not. Or you might be able to stipple the grip as well. So if you could stipple the grip, that's good too, but make sure it's legal. It's weird. Some divisions you can put skateboard tape on, some divisions you can stipple, some divisions, back in the day at least, I haven't read the recent rule books, you couldn't stipple the grips. So just be aware of that, okay? So let's talk about holsters real quick, and then we'll do some Q&A and I'll get off here, okay? First of all, now this is my current IDPA belt and holster. You kind of see it's old rusty, broke down Safariland, which I love. I've been supported by Safariland for forever. I'm going to show you one other manufacturer variant of holster here in a second. But one of the biggest things, and I don't have my USPSA rig in here, but the same principles apply in terms of your holster and your belt. Number one, I see a lot of shooters at matches that are wearing their gear, specifically IDPA matches. In terms of this belt, it's very, very robust and thick, if that makes any sense. What I see all the time, folks, is I see people show up at matches with a standard belt on, and then they put their holster, whatever holster variant they have on the belt, and it moves around. I mean, you could see it moving around on their body. So one of the things that I want you to understand is when your holster is on your belt, there should really be no forward and backward movement. Like when I pull it on this, you can see there's no movement. It doesn't wiggle, it doesn't click or pop, and it's pretty stiff on the belt itself. Okay. Now I actually took this holster, and I'm going to probably change this slightly and make this a little bit more professional appearing. But I took tape and I put on one corner here, and I put tape on the bottom side here. The reason I did that was because these slots that go on the belt were a little bit bigger, and they would allow me to put the holster on my belt, and the holster would still kind of go click back and forth like that. So rule number one, have a really good, buy the most robust, thick belt you possibly can. This one is made by Safariland. I have this is another competition belt I have on, and I'm going to show you their gear in a second. This particular belt is one made by PrecisionHolsters.com. This is my current carry belt, and this carry belt, all the way, by the way, they have two versions of this belt made by Precision Holsters. This one is not as rigid and as thick as the other one I have. The other one I have is very, very rigid and very, very thick. It would be great for IDPA as well. But that thickness allows you to put your holster back on the belt and then maintain that position. So the bottom line is, when you put your holster on, you do not want any movement whatsoever when the gun. We do not want the holster sliding on the belt. We don't want the holster moving on the belt, okay? Now, one more thing about this. In terms of the angle of the holster, when you look at the angle of the gun on the holster, notice that there's probably about a 1 degree forward cant on the holster itself, right, on the belt. It's not canted backward, and the reason I want that 1 degree forward cant-ish is because that allows me to naturally build my grip on the handgun without having to take my shoulder and break it like this when I'm drawing the handgun. I don't want to do that. I want to be able to take my hands and draw it by taking the hand straight in the handgun with no shoulder motion whatsoever. I want to have a very natural position of the gun. So there's a slight cant back, if that makes any sense. But the bottom line is, when you have your gun on the holster, the holster should not move at all. Zero. It should angle, it should move. It should be at the proper angle, right? So buy a good belt, folks. Buy a really robust belt, and then buy a holster that actually mounts to your belt in a manner that is robust as well. Now here's the deal about mounting system. We're just talking about the Precision Holsters competition line, which, by the way, I saw their IDPA version and their mag pouches, and I can't wait to get mine to try a couple. There are some design features in their holsters, even their carry holsters, that would blow your mind. Matter of fact, I can't even talk about them on video because they're proprietary. The way they designed this particular holster was unbelievable. Matter of fact, I mean, I haven't had it on a belt yet because I haven't mounted it to my USPSA gear. I've done most of IDPA, and I'm going to get the version in very, very soon. But when you draw this gun, I mean, there's an adjustment screw on the holster itself, so I can adjust the holster. But there is retention. I mean, I have to pull it out of the holster, but when I do, you know, it's like butter coming out of the holster. I mean, it's so fast. There's no friction points on the holster. So when I'm talking about friction points, I'm talking about if you get the wrong kind of holster, or you modify your holster, or you don't have your holster set up properly and it moves on the belt. The problem with the holster moving on the belt, if it moves in or out, or it moves or cants at an angle like this on the belt, which means that if it's moved on the belt, when you pull the gun out, like your shoulder and your arm is going to be in the same spot. So when you pull the gun out, you are actually increasing the friction on the holster itself. Okay, and if there's a friction point or friction, then of course that's going to slow your drawdown. So you want to make sure you have your holster set up and a holster that is designed with no friction points. Now this one has some very unique design properties where there are no friction points on this holster. Okay, and by the way, you can go to if you want to check them out. They have some pictures. They're not for sale yet, but they will be for sale very, very soon. So if you want to check out like I said, this is my current carry belt made by Precision Holsters. The first belt I showed, this is actually Firearm. They've been a big supporter of mine for a long time. They're my current competitive holster sponsor. But Precision Holsters sponsors our podcast, and this is what my buddy Rich and I carry our carry guns on. But they have some exciting, for me, very exciting competition holsters that'll be for sale in the very near future. And by the way, they gave me one of my favorite colors. Okay. I wish I had one of their mag pouches to show you because they have some features that I absolutely adore as well. Number one, they're open in the top. And by the way, their mounting system that John at Precision Holsters has come up with is freaking fantastic as well. Now, in terms of your mag pouches, these are my two single mag pouches I use in IDPA. The mag pouch rule is very much like the holster rule. When I get the mag pouches on the belt, these actually click on, but you're going to see that there are not really any movement in the mag pouches itself. But anyways, the mag pouches are the same thing. They have to be robust and secure on the belt itself. So whatever you're using to secure the mag pouches to the belt, figure out a system where they're not going to slide or move around, okay? We can't have things moving on our gear. We cannot have that happen. Now, in terms of like the angle, you know, my mag pouch is in a position where when it's on my body, when my hand hits it, it's the same angle as my wrist. So I pay attention, you know, to my gun angle, which I showed you earlier in terms of the holster itself, you know, put the gun back on the holster, right? And I pay a lot of attention to the, you know, the angle of the actual mag as well. Okay, so I've got about a 1 degree forward cant, okay? Very stiff and robust belt, okay? So we talked about gun setup, you know, getting your sight systems like you want to. Number two, increasing, you know, get a sight system that will allow you to see the sights very precisely, very clearly, and also to recognize the difference between the front and rear sight. We talked about friction points, skateboard tape, skateboard grips, stippling, that increases the friction on the grip as much as you could possibly increase the friction on the grip. I showed you my preference for if you have the ability to legally within division, flat triggers, as well as removing material so I can manipulate and access, you know, releases and stuff like that, once again, within the divisions, and then taking any square or any unneeded material out of the magazine well area itself so you can perform a good reload or a fast reload. You don't want your magazines hanging up inside the gun, if that makes sense. And remember, one more time, if you want to know more about the advanced or full drills, I'm wearing the American Competitive Shooter Society shirt this morning. I'm sporting the 3 rule shirt. You can go to bikeseatclinic.com